Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Corey Zanko, an art historian at Monmouth University and a member of the faculty committee Art Now, Performance, Art, and Technology. I want to invite you to participate in an upcoming performance on campus of Lygia Pape's Divisor, or Divider, a piece from the late 1960s. To do so, I first want to offer a brief description of Pape's work and to begin to contextualize her art practice for you. During much of the 20th century, avant-garde artists experimented by using abstraction and non-objective forms in their art making. They searched for new visual languages to both respond to modernity and to attempt to shape rapidly changing society through their art making. Of course, each of these movements is contextualized or impacted by the specific time and place in which the artist worked. This means that some of the art may look very similar, yet the particulars of each context makes them different movements of art. Brazilian artist Lygia Pape said, "My concern is always invention. I want to discover new things. Because to me, art is a way of knowing the world, to see how the world is, of getting to know the world." Over the course of her career, she worked with a variety of media: painting, drawing, printmaking, sculpture, installation, film, photography, performance, and poetry. Pape even studied philosophy and began making visual art in the early 1950s. While studying at the Museum of Modern Art in Rio de Janeiro, she met a number of artists who were interested in concrete art, or when geometric abstraction is entirely free of any basis in observed reality and has no symbolic meaning. As Grupo Frente, which translates to front group, they worked and exhibited together starting in 1952, led by Ivan Serpa. Along with Pape, the group included Helio Otasica, Eloizio Carvo, and Lygia Clark. Their early works would have gone against the figuration and nationalism found in much of the prominent art in Brazil at the time. However, many of the artists from Grupo Frente eventually broke away, rejecting the extreme rationality of much concrete art, such as the pure mathematical art being created by the Grupo Ruptura in Sao Paulo. Artists including Pape, Clark, and Otasica began the Brazilian neo-concrete movement, releasing a manifesto and holding an exhibition about their new approach in 1959. They wanted to create works that allowed for a more phenomenological experience by the spectator, meaning that the work could be multisensory and more explicitly create a direct relationship between the artwork and the viewer. Art viewing was not to be just a visual and intellectual exercise or experience. The neo-concrete movement lasted about 2 years until 1961, when the artists split to work in different ways. But the influence of these ideas continued in Pape's work, especially in her interest in working with space, time, and participation. A turning point is often noted with Pape's neo-concrete ballets, for which she hid dancers inside these boxes, trying to render space dynamic and do away with the academic concept of the stage. The forms moved around to the sounds of electronic music and poetry and under colorful lights. Other of her works asked for viewers to use their senses beyond vision, including pieces that even invoked taste and touch. For Divider, Pape blurred the line between observer and participant. She wanted to create a work that brought individuals into a collective and that could be performed even if she was not there. This piece involves a group moving together while all wearing a large blank canvas. She asked participants to walk, but also to skip and move in more celebratory ways. The large white fabric is not the work of art. It must be activated by the audience for the work to exist. She first held this piece with children from the favelas or shanty towns on the outskirts of Brazil's large cities like Rio. Soon after, she saw its performance in the gardens of Rio's Museum of Modern Art. To keep in mind the specific context or circumstances that surrounded the making of Pape's Divider, we have to remember the formal experiments going on in the visual arts as just one part of it. We also need to consider the oppressive military dictatorship in Brazil. In 1964, the Brazilian armed forces, with support from the U.S. government, held a coup d'etat, overthrew the democratically elected president, and eventually disbanded Congress. The military controlled the nation-state until 1985, often installing generals as presidents. This period of time was one of authoritarian control, including extreme censorship, as well as torture and violence against opponents. Civilians, including artists, could be tried for speaking out, which led many artists to turn to ephemeral forms of art making that would not exist for long periods of time, such as conceptual art and performance. Many, including Otisika and Clark, also fled the country. Pape stayed. In this context, Divisor allowed people to move through public space en masse during a time when protests were suppressed and the streets surveilled. This is very different from Pape's first plan for the piece, to have the action unfold in an art gallery while hot air blew up from below the sheet. It was a much more public, much more accessible way to display this piece or enact this piece, and much more inviting of a larger audience. Pape continued to experiment with film during the dictatorship and made ethnographic works about the often neglected indigenous populations of Brazil. She also composed installations and sculptures based on the architecture of the favelas. Part of her desire was to democratize art, turning to more inclusive subject matter and experiences for a larger audience, rather than those privileged with access to quote-unquote high culture. Yet some scholars do critique her later work for the way it romanticizes poverty. Museums and galleries often re-perform Divisor along with exhibitions of Pape's work, yet each re-performance occurs in a different context. For instance, the Metropolitan Museum of Art oversaw a group of participants as they walked down Fifth Avenue. One participant noted that it did create a sense of the group coming together. However, because they were on a busy New York City street, the museum and police directed them so much for safety purposes, it seemed to defeat the point of the piece. They wrote, "We are supposed to take over the street, not be dictated by its laws." We will reenact Divisor in our own context. What does it mean to be an individual and come together as a collective in our time and culture? What do the aesthetics of the piece, such as the use of the white cloth, suggest? How does it feel to participate in this experience, activating the work with your body and moving through space over a duration of time? Please join us in performing Divisor.